Hi, thanks for joining me for another adult coloring page. What I'm going to show you today is a double technique, and that involves regular coloring pencils, also watercolor pencils, to help enhance your paintings. They both give a different effect on the final outcome. So I'm going to do one out of here. Most of the adult coloring sheets are made from a type of newsprint paper, and they won't take to this technique. What you want to do is find a book that has thick pages and the pages are kind of slick. Like if the pages feel smooth and sort of slick or slippery, then it may take well to using watercolor on there. Also, if you want to use markers, make sure you have a thick page, also one that has a print only on one side. If you use one that has a print on both sides, you may ruin one of the sides because the markers tend to bleed through the pages. And if it's that newsprint, dull feeling page, it will bleed through to the other side and ruin a page, similar to this. So this doesn't feel smooth, and if you use a marker on one side, it will bleed through and ruin the other side. So I don't recommend it on those pages. Just stick with the coloring pencils themselves. Where on this one, the pages are quite thick. This is a really nice thick piece of paper. So I know it'll take to the watercolor. Also, I'm not going to use that much water. Normally, when you use watercolor, you take the page down. The sheets are not perforated, and I'm going to see if I can just leave the page in the book. So what I'm going to do, this is one of my favorite subjects, which are sunflowers, and this can be viewed, this is the book and this is how it's viewed. However, if you want, you can turn this and view it this direction, which I think that's what I'm going to do because I like that. Now I'm going to try and stick with the colors that you would go with. It may or may not work. So we have these two colors. I don't want to make this one more prominent than that one, so I'm going to try and keep it down some. However, I would use more than one color. So I have several yellows in my thing, and I have a brown, which I would use, and I would also use a purple. I may even use a little orange here and there, so let me grab the orange out now. It's weird colors, but that's what I would use. And the center is brown. I'm going to add a little brown in there. What I do to one flower, I do to the other. These are one thing about these may have a little wax on them, and I may not be able to use the watercolor over them so well, so I'm going to stop myself here and tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the color pencils on this one, and I'm going to use the watercolor on this one, and then we'll see what happens. I can put down the watercolor and come back over it and use these color pencils on top of the watercolor. So these are just a pack of watercolor pencils that I picked up from that dollar store. It has a yellow in it, and it also has some purple. That's black and red. I'm not going to use those right now. I'm going to see what happens when I use these two. There's no brown in there. There's a black. So I already have black on this one down here. So I'm not going to add any other black to that. However, I am going to come along here and add that. I'm going to, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to slide a little purple in here, in between the petals, and down here close to the bottom. These are petals also, but they're really small. That's where I'm going to put the purple at. All up along there. And the purple is a complementary color to the yellow. It will turn brown, so let's see if we can kind of keep them separate and not create brown. Now there are some double petals. I want to be able to see these petals in the back. So you see I'm making a V shape. Let's get those out of the way. Making a V shape right here and then going around. They're double petals here and there. And I'm not being meticulous. I don't like to be meticulous. I prefer to use, if I was using paint, this is what I would be doing. Someone may say it's sloppy, but it's not. It's going to create some variation and some interest in this painting. And I'm going to just come in here and add some here and there, because there's a lot of little sunflower petals here and there in throughout here. This is an experiment, but I think it's going to turn out right, and depends on what it looks like. Remember, I can come back over it with the regular color pencils. So I'm going just here and there around some of these petals. There's a ton of them mixed up here. These would be the sunflower seeds themselves here in the middle. That's that. And what I'm going to do is put the water on here. Since this is a watercolor area, I'm going to put the water on here and allow that to be drying while I address this part with just the color pencils themselves. So I'm going to use a small flat brush. Notice it's about the size of my pinky nail. I'm going to use just a flat brush, excuse me, with just a little water, not much. Get the brush wet. I'm going to shake it off. And what I'm going to do, if you have a round brush, that will work really well, but I don't want it to be so meticulous. I want some of this paint to bleed over onto the other petal, like so. So I'm not painting the petals. Remember, this is a sunflower, and I want the sunflowers to be yellow. But I'm going around it, and here I want a little up on the petals to create a little shadow and interest. If you look at a flower up close, you'll notice there's a lot of variations in it. Our brain tends to bleed everything together. I didn't put any over here. Our brain tends to put it all together as one. And that's not what we want to do. So I'm getting a little more water. I'm shaking my brush. Let you see what I'm doing. Getting water, wetting it, shaking it. I want the majority of the water off. And now I'm going here and here. Letting some bleed over here and there on the other petals, or on the petal is fine. And now I'm addressing these little ones that I put markings in here. I don't want them all over the place, just here and there, like what I did. I put markings here and there. That's how I want the paint to be. I don't want all of them to be purple, and when I come back over it and add the yellow to it, I don't want it to turn brown. That's exactly what it will do because these are complementary colors. And I didn't address this area either, did I? I'm addressing it dry because if I wet the watercolor pencil, it may give it way more paint than I want it to have. There, I think that's enough. And then I'm going to come back over that with the yellow. So this yellow isn't very bright, but as you can see, this is it here. I'm going to see just how much I'm going to need. Let's see. Now I'm going to swish my brush around in the water, shake it, and now I'm going to go over the yellow, because remember it's watercolor. And if it's too much purple in that particular area, it's going to make it dull, looking like it does right there. See, that one looks a little duller than the other one. And right where that purple was there, remember, that's doing pretty good. That's its job. When you mix two complementary colors up together, one will tone the other one down so it's not so vibrant and bright, but too much will make it turn brown. And I don't want to cover up every inch of the area because it will leave some white space in there and it will make it look varied, the paints themselves. In person, as I'm looking, it's making some of it look dull and dark, and that's because it's got a lot of purple in there. And this is the complementary color to the yellow. I'll lay this pencil sideways and color with the side of the lead. I don't want so much of the lines showing from the pencil mark. Let's see what that looks like. You can tell I put a little more on those two than I did on the other one. But this is closer to me than that one. And I can always come back in here and add more color. Let's see what this looks like when I add more color here. Now some water. That purple is really standing out. And I am not worried one bit. Because, of course, I can come back over this with the colored pencils. Also, I'm going to do something in just a second. I'm going to use, so far I'm just using the yellow and the purple. And I'm not worried about coloring every space because it's watercolor. I'm going to come in here and add little specks of red. Let's see what that's going to look like. I'm looking for a little orange. Ah, that's still wet. See how dark that looks. I'm looking for a little orange. You see how it made this side pop? I put that red in there. You notice how much more interesting these petals are here than these petals are. You need that variation in color, but I need these dry. They're still wet. So I need these dry, and I'll come back over them and add these variations of red in here. That red, you want the flower or the painting to look realistic or interesting. You want to add more than just one or two colors. Otherwise, see, it looks flat and uninteresting. Here, it's giving a lot more interest because we know this cluster in here will be darker colored than these out here will be. Beautifully done. So that was red I added in here. I'm going to add a little bit more on these petals in the background that you can't see. Remember, I added purple around here, but I'm adding that red on there. Just going up and around the shape of the petal. And the reason I'm waiting for those to dry over here is because I don't want too much of the red showing vibrantly. Then it'll look like a red sunflower instead of the yellow one. I may make one of these in the back a red sunflower. I've had some of those and they call them red, but they usually look orangey. That was a really dark there, so I'm adding more red over here, a little darker. Following the shape of the petal. And of course some of these back here in the back. Even here where the purple line is, this purple is going to act as a shadow on the petal behind it. And these will take on the shape. Anytime you're putting stuff down, it takes on the shape of the object that it's representing. So the petals are going out that way. I don't want to come across. I want to go really up and around where the shape is. I can even come here along where the purple is and add some to it. It will not hurt. It creates interest. You see how much more interesting that looked once I added that? And that's adding the red. The purple is a complementary color, so too much purple is going to give us a color we don't want, which is brown. That's okay for some of these here in the center. Now this is the yellow. I'm going to come back and add some darker. I'm pressing a little harder, giving it a little more color or pigment. If these were pan colors, I would just add concentrated pigment to it, which means less water and more pigment. It would be almost like food coloring. And I can tell here in certain ones where I don't have that extra color on there, it's going to give it that look. So this paper, you see that water coming through there on that side, on the back side, but no color yet. This is a good thick piece of paper. So I added a little too much water here in this spot. So I'm going to make sure I let that dry. I'm adding more pigment up here, especially where I have these purples at. I may have to just add more red where I have the purples at so that it's not creating that brown effect. I don't want them to cancel each other out. Adding this red to it is really causing it to spark. Which is fine. That already looks so much different. So now I'm going to go ahead and add the water, but this time I'm wiping the brush off on the side of my container. And I'm going to come down from here with these yellows. Just the difference when you're doing your painting, rinsing it off, wiping it off on the side of the container, you may think, oh, all of these are close together, I'll just paint them all as one big blob. And I'm here to tell you, you don't want to do that. It will show. So that had a lot of red over here, and I wiped some over on another petal. So I'm getting some water, I'm wiping the water, excess water off on the side of the container. Wiping it down is keeping I don't want that much red up on the petal. I want that red concentrated down here. So each time I put my brush in this water, I wipe off the extra water because I don't want it to be an excess amount of water like it was in that one or two spots I had. So you touch each petal separately with the water. It will read to the viewer that you touched each one separately with the water. There. It's a lot of purple on there and a lot of red on there, but I like it. And so I need to address this part here. Now in here, I'm going to treat them sort of like a blob. I'm not going to do them like I did these individual petals because they're clustered together. So what I am going to do is I'm going to come in here where I have the purples and I'm going to add some red like I did outside here. I'm putting it right over where I have the purple. Addressing that first, right over where I have the purples. And then I'm going to go in a couple of other areas that there's no purple in. And I'm not being meticulous about it. So I'm going to put the yellow in there, but I want these other colors, and I want it to look like it's a darker cluster of petals, because it is. And now, let's see, I'm going to come in here with the yellow. I don't have a brown, but I may put brown from the color pencils in here. I don't want this cluster looking as vibrant as that cluster. Even though they're all petals, these down here are closer together and they're small, so they're not going to have as much brightness to them. It's once they pop out and expand. Now let's see what that looks like. I'm going to wipe the water off on the side and paint inward, touching here and there. Now I'm not trying to make these separate clusters in here like I did these petals out here. In fact, I'm kind of painting over, as you can see, some I'm painting over. But I have all the colors in here that I have out here. Perfect. When that dries, I think I'm going to add some brown, because I do have a brown color. So we're going to set that aside. I'm kind of happy with that. I like the way that looks. I'm going to come up here and address this flower with just the colored pencils. And usually when I paint with the colored pencils, I keep them out so that I'm not confusing myself as to what I used and what I didn't use. And now I'm going to do it similar to that first flower that I did. I like to create the interest. So I have orange on this one where I had red on that one. I like to create interest. And so that's why sometimes I will mix this paint like this. I generally do a background painting first. And then I paint on top of it, and that tends to create the interest I'm looking for. So on that one I use red, but red and yellow will make orange. Here I have an orange one. So I'm going to come in here and address some of these petals like I did that one. The difference in this is when I use my colored pencils, if I come in too strong with the colored pencil, I can't take it off. It's hard to erase them. So I come in and I add some stuff, and then I'll come back and add some more. Like so. Now I'm going to give some purple to it here and there. Just like I did when I did the watercolor part. Use this to create a shadow, but you don't have to. I don't want them to be the same, but I want them to be similar because I want to be able to see the difference between the two mediums. And I'm using, going ahead and using the orange here because that red color pencil, I can't tell which one is red and which one isn't. The red looks sort of pink to me. So I use that purple. I'm going to use one yellow over here. I'm going to now paint. Most things come, I guess, with one yellow. This one has 3 yellows in it. And I tend to paint. When I paint, I like to use 3 different shades. I just painted the wrong one. I think that went with that one. Of a color, should I say. To give it some interest. And this one is a little darker. So I'm painting with these colored pencils rather sloppily, and the reason being I'm leaving gaps in it so that I can come back with another color and paint in those areas. It's not so good painting trying to paint and there's nothing there to paint. There's no space left. But it creates a variation and it makes the painting somewhat more interesting. Why? Because we're not making walls or painting walls, as I say. We're creating a something more interesting than a painted wall. They're giving almost the same effect, I must say. So I'm going to come over with this lighter yellow and color in the rest of the spots. Actually go over the whole thing to kind of dull it down. And this should be darker than the rest. That's really turning out to be about the same, but when this dries, I think I'm going to come over it with some of this colored pencil. To make it more interesting. That red that I use here pops more than that orange. You can see that red in here really pops more than that orange that I placed in here, which is a good thing because I didn't want them to be competing for the attention of the viewer. So I think I'm going to downplay it that way. I'm not going to make it pop any more than what it is. I just want it to be slightly different than here, these two. And I'm using the side of the color pencil, making it lay on the side instead of coloring with the very point of it. Kind of like that. I think I'm going to go around these with the purple. Casting a shadow on the flower underneath so that it creates a depth. I don't want to outline the flower, so I'm actually painting purple on the petals of this flower so that this one will come forward. So I'm making it darker here around the edge, and then I'll come out lightly here on this petal to create that shadow effect. See how it's making it pop? And sometimes that's what you have to do. Now normally you would say that ruined the painting, but when you look at it, it made this flower come forward. I like that. Let's see what happens when I add some color pencil on this. So you see how that looks? There, I use the same colors, watercolor on here, and yeah, this color pencil has a waxy feel to it that I wouldn't have been able to use watercolor on that. Let's get that red orange. I have a burnt sienna on there. I can use for these in the background. Warm colors move forward, so I don't want to give that too much. I don't want to give it too much color on those back ones. See it there? Let's see, I'm all out of the camera's angle. I'm just adding some color here and there. I don't want to make these too they're noticeable because they're all in front. This one is actually in front of that one, so I'm gonna have to address that. These other ones are a little bit back behind. So I want them to stay back in the back, so I'm not giving them too much attention, and I'm going to use this dull yellow on them. To try and keep it in the back. However, it's not working on some of them. Let's go here. And one thing I say, turn your painting so that it's comfortable for you to paint. being a little loosey-goosey here. Look at that. They're not so much staying in the background, and it doesn't look like they're going to, but this one is in front of that one, so I'm going to have to come around here and make a shadow like I did this one. You gotta put that shadow on there to make it pop. If you want it to look consistent and realistic around the entire painting, you have to add those extra little details. Put just a little purple here and there, not much. I want to see if I can come in with that watercolor here and there. See what that looks like. Wetting the brush and wiping it off on the side. Because I really don't want them to pop that much. And I found the more you try not to get something to pop, the more it pops. I'm just coming over it with the watercolor yellow. Not much water. We don't want much water on that. Just enough. I don't want it to bleed through the page. I'm looking at the page. That's still pretty good. That's pretty good. This is all dry, so I may go over it with, add some in here. And that's going to make it pop. Now I guarantee if these were regular watercolor pan pigments, I could do this with it without coming over it with this regular color pencil. Because the pigments in the, oops, that's still wet, felt wet. The pigments in the pan pigments of watercolor are really, really strong. Following the shape of the petal. I want this flower to look more vibrant than every other flower on this page, and that's why I'm coming back over here. Otherwise, they will all look the same in intensity, and that wouldn't be what I want. See how that changed it? It made it pop just by adding it here. And I'm going up over where I had the purples at. The purple looked to be a bit much, but it's needed to create interest. So I'm going over the purple with the red. And they're still reading as yellow. Now let's see what I can do with these. So it works really well, keeping it loose. In all of these, you want to keep it loose. It's going to turn out perfectly if you're not stressing over it. And just layers and layers of extra color. Those are not artists' watercolors, but they still get the job done. There. So this one is still looking like it's in front of all of the rest of them. Now I did these as yellow and orangey or reds, but you can do these in any color that you choose to do these in. Just have some fun with them. And still that middle, I put the brown on there. I'll come back and add a little bit more brown because the center of the sunflowers, they look black. Those are the seeds. And when you look up close, sometimes they look brown. So brown and black is fine. And little specks of the in here white, because that's what the sunflower seeds have on them, or where the light hits them. Perfect. I think that was nicely done. So remember to make sure it's a thick page with only one printed on one side and not both sides. And then you can take this out. It curled some, but not a ton. That's why we use such a small amount of water. So it did curl some, but no problem. You can lay that out, and if you want to, you can frame this. This was really nicely in a frame. And I put a small amount of paint or colors on the inside of mine. However, you can do more if you like. And if you want to make all of them outstanding, you can. I just like to make one more of a focal point, and then that one, and then the other one. So even though these two are in front of that one, this flower still stands out more. Okay, thanks for joining me. Until next time.